everybody. Welcome to Gathering of the Minds. Thank you, and with that, we go to the Q&A.
We are in a deep state of being stuck in a cult of deceit. And Americans, unfortunately, and most of the world has been deceived and lied to for many decades. So pre-incident, think about it. Most of the corporate media that was happening was bombarding homes with images of war and mayhem in Vietnam. The media lied us into war, into weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And it's okay to show gore and war and bombings of innocent people, and later to find out that we were lied to. So a lot of this dumbing down of society is perpetrated by, whether it be the CIA Mockingbird or governments around the world to strip us from the power that we have. And within each of us, we're all divine beings. We all have the cosmic spark within us where we can elevate our consciousness and really guide the evolution of humanity without being told by these bureaucrats and control freaks and egomaniacs as to what is good for us or what is not good for us. We're being lied on the big pharma side. And think about it, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or the institutions of government, of organized religions, of banking cartels, and a military industrial complex. Those are the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So either we grow up and truly take our power back as star seeds of consciousness, or we will diminish and go down a spiral of self-destruction on our own, being guided and controlled by these forces and these institutions. So my question to each of you is, how do you individually come into your own power, and into your own community? What is it that you do to elevate the consciousness of those that you love and those in the community that you are part of? Thank you.
I guess my biggest effort in that regard was creating a company and a social network. There was a company called Evolver. It's still up. I'm just not actively involved with it anymore. But web magazine called Reality Sandwich. So we kind of like trying to spread ideas and new paradigm. And we had a social movement called the Evolvers Network. And we created local community groups. We supported the creation with volunteers. And we had like 50 or 70 local groups. We would do monthly events around different themes, ranging from permaculture, shamanism, to local currencies, with the idea of like creating nodes and alternative culture. And it was just very difficult to get funding for it. It was, and so ultimately we kind of abandoned that project in a certain respect. And I'm still very sad about it because, it feels like what's happening in the US is, in a way, like this alt-right thing is the only thing that has cultural energy in like, particularly in the red states. We're kind of like cultural deserts. So people are graduating to, it's almost like the punk rock, thing, where people just graduate to the thing that's extremist, that gives them some kind of voice, some kind of sense of holding on to something. And we really need nodes of an alternative paradigm that, is more transformative, more communal oriented, more oriented towards everything that you just spoke about. So that's my shtick.
I'm a journalist, so I think I make a video every day about some prominent issue, and then every so often I try to, as much as possible, travel around the world and go on the ground to actually explore, experience, and then share what is happening, at least from my personal point of view, and looking at statistics, talking with people, and then hopefully, I used to work in nonprofits, as I mentioned before, and that's a soul-crushing job. A lot of people think nonprofits sound so great, but when you're working in fundraising, what really happens is you start to just, people become numbers, they become donors, and then you realize that most of these big nonprofits, I'm not going to name anybody, but name the biggest one that you think is great, they're probably just trying to take care of themselves. They got an executive director making $1 million+, and it's just a horrible business. And I felt, when you have these organizations that are willing to lie, mislead, distort because they want to just maintain their existence, or because they think they're the righteous ones, that God is on their side, it just became depressing. And I figured, you know what? Maybe I could just go around and tell people what I see happening, and then try and break things down and, to the best of my ability, remove extreme biases from a lot of these stories. But I'm not perfect. I do what I can, I guess.
But I think I want to focus more on this and offline stuff and actually helping guide people to offline, like face-to-face stuff that Eleanor was talking about. I think that is definitely how to transform more extremist stuff on both sides. And then, additionally, just helping people understand that the time that we spend online it matters, and like the places that you visit matter, and the place that you give clicks and give your energy matters. Like that is actually what manifests power structures on the internet. So, don't use all the old stuff like we all have to a certain degree. But it's really important to give at least some amount of your energy towards the new emerging platforms. And then, being offline as much as you can too.
So I'm a journalist as well. I'm also an activist and an organizer, and so I try to, also as a creative activist, I try to use creative mediums to promote socio-political change. So that's what I do on a daily basis. And I also think, to Daniel's point, that the alt-right has created a culture. There are a lot of other cultures that have created, not created, but they're being noticed. For example, we're all white on this stage. But I think that what Black Lives Matter has created, what the indigenous movements have created from Standing Rock to Louisiana, I think those are cultures and movements and messages that are becoming part of the zeitgeist. So it's not just the alt-right, and I think that's important to note, because I think that the next generation is also latching on to these new cultural ideas as well, that are gaining popularity and gaining steam. So
Just a quick jump in on that. I just think it's really important to understand the nuance involved in, when you're talking about the alt-right or Black Lives Matter or indigenous movements, these are not black and white movements in themselves. Antifa, whatever it is, they're all extremely complex with many different factions inside of them. So it's not just X is good, Y is bad. We have to keep digging in to what is good and what is bad in each of these.
Oh yeah, I was just pointing out that they're not the
taking
only movement that's gaining steam or popularity.
Yeah, for sure.
The very fact that you're here tonight gives me a great sense of hope. Do you know how many people there are in the world? And how many people that we know, where you ask them, did you have an argument with somebody today? Did you talk about something political? Did you say something right? Somebody will say, no. You know what we're talking about tonight on TV? The weather, the snow. Oh, for God's sakes, it's gonna snow, get over it. For 30 years, I started when talk radio, remember that? Talk radio, Rush Limbaugh, this was the biggest thing, and for 30 years I've been through, for every argument there is, the fairness doctrine, you gotta live through that one. But I have spent all of my adult waking hours in one form or another talking about something, arguing, whatever. And I will say this with all due respect, I love you all, I don't care what you think. I thought you were gonna come to blows, you two before, about Antifa. It was music to my ears. And you, sir, I have no idea what you said. But it was But there's a brilliance in the fact that we're not talking about the weather. Here we are, we're doing something, all of us in our own little ways. Look at Sticks. There isn't a bomb shelter. Bless his heart. And he is doing, we are talking to computers, and I'm talking about things, the complexities of stuff, and I'm wondering, what am I doing? Here I am, and I can't help it. It's like we were born to do this. Just respect what people are saying. You don't have to agree with it. Just do what I do. Just say, interesting, and move on, and laugh behind your back. But that's what we do. Because there are people that I know who say, what do you think about this? No, seriously, what's your passion? What pisses you off? What is it? You're an activist. You know how many de-activists I know? People they don't know. They're lethargic, they're torpid, they're just, it's not that they've given up. I don't know if it's a fluoride in the water. That's what it is. And the fact that you said that, the fact that this reminds me of like the 60s, because I remember it was kind of a kid. But there was this thing where we talked about love and peace and anti-war, and it was serious, and music was politics. it was I guess I'm going back to that. So the fact that we're here today is hope. If everybody did what we did, just had an opinion about something and kept up and got in people's faces and drove people nuts. I'm sure we all have family members that go, oh God, here he comes again. Here we go with that. That's what change. That's what change is about. That's what this is about. And remember, don't ever let anybody tell you you can't speak. That's all I'm saying. Say whatever it is, no matter how insane it is. But I'd rather you say it than not be able to. That's
Yeah. Sticks?
I would say paired with that, it's just the spread of education, of information in general through the internet has become such a massive juggernaut. And it's a great thing. It's not just politics. It's not just society. That's certainly being driven by it and driving the conversation. Everything, spirituality certainly is part of this. Literature is now far more widely available than at any other time in human history. Up until about 30 years ago, it was basically print. That's all you had for the most part. You might be able to get something, you could print it out maybe at home, less expensively, but ultimately, it was physical copies and you couldn't really find it even on the early internet. Now you can find anything. You can find absolutely any text that you want. It's 2,000 years old. Somebody scanned it from some library collection and they've put it on archive.org or any of a million other sites. It's a juggernaut of information. The worst thing that we could possibly do at this point is let up when we are developing now the next wave of tech. Mr. Ahman developing mines. Gab is there. You've got fundraising platforms. You've got video hosting alternatives. These are all great things, I think, for the development not just of culture and of politics and the critique of society, but for everything else under the sun as well. We can't let up, and we have to work as hard as we can towards these things. And that depends on a person's skills too. One person might be very good at speaking. Another person might be very good at writing. They might not share that in common. Another person may be good at, maybe they grow things. Another person's really good at designing fabrics or making clothes. All of these things can be found online. And I think that's the best thing for the world.
Thank you. And now we have a question over here with the gentleman.
First of all, Sticks, I'd like to thank you for broadcasting yourself and to the capital of capitalism itself, New York. Also, on top of that, I have a question about the overall global state of the internet itself. Right now, as we speak, global penetration rate of broadband is around 50%. That is about half the world's population does not have an internet connection as of this point. If you remember in the early 90s to, the early 2000s, the left and the establishment pushed for broadband expansion across the globe. Right now, the United States is somewhere around 80% broadband penetration. Do you think there'll be a slowdown in broadband penetration considering the fact that they've seen things such as WikiLeaks using the internet as a platform against the establishment? Thank you.
I think in general, there won't be a slowdown of the growth of the internet because it's beginning to move into areas where that penetration is a lot less, like maybe parts of Eastern Europe. I can remember maybe 10 years ago or something on some of the first blogging endeavors that I used. There was a thing called revolver maps. I'm not sure if they're even still active because I haven't used it in a while. And you'd look. And if you looked at where people were connecting to your content from, it was fairly popular at the time, literary content mostly. If you looked at where they were connecting from, it was the United States was lit up like a Christmas tree, Western Europe, Oceania, Japan a bit, and there were large gaps in the world where there wasn't much going on. Fast forward even 2 or 3 years, and you saw it substantially growing, and it's growing Eastern Europe, Latin America, parts of West Africa, certainly parts of Southeast Asia. And in many cases, it's maybe small towns or outlying communities that, lacked basic functions like even maybe electricity in some cases before. I don't think there will be a slowdown in the next 10 to 20 years, except that, the audience in the US, places that were already developed, certainly the growth there will slow down. I think you're going to get increasingly more translating software and things of that nature as well. That's something that alt tech should look into, building into their sites the ability of people to seamlessly translate things, because a lot of those countries are not English speaking. I think that would be highly beneficial over time.
All right, next question. Gentleman in the blue.
Hi, what's your take on some words that come viral so quickly, like Soy Boy, All Right, Trump Tards? I feel like the trend has become like its own form of society. I know that in some of your videos of sticks where, you know, you have 10.2, like, it's really funny and all, but, you know, it's like, it's all in subculture in a sense, and I just wanna know what your take on that.
I would say I really love I've got the best fans. I'm just going to say that straight up, not to throw shade at anyone, but I get the best fans. The Spoon Clank and 10.2 and stuff like that, it brings endless amusement when people make cartoons. Because I'm not moralistic, because I don't care if things are irreverent or blasphemous, or even if they insult me, I have a great time even when people make, you know, sly asides about me that would be seen as negative. Any sort of attention in that field helps to promulgate my message. And ultimately, that's a good thing because I fight for people to be able to promulgate all messages. Even if a person has beliefs, opinions that are offensive, that I even disagree with, I would be willing to debate them on the point. I think that's something that's different from a lot of people in the what I call the lamestream in the establishment. They're not willing to debate any points. They think that if you disagree with them, you're too far out there. It doesn't really matter what direction you're coming from. As for some of the monikers that have been made, like Trump-tard and things like that, they can be disrespectful, certainly, but I think that they should be totally allowed.
Anybody else want to add on that, or just next question?
On one hand, this is what we're doing right now. It's probably old school and the best thing an alternative we're doing. We're having FaceTime. This is what was done prior to internet. This is what people did. We agreed or disagreed, but he put one foot forward. He made history with this, or figured something out, or at least came with a balance. In the beginning, the internet was great, easy, resourceful, made it cocooning, but regardless of what your culture or political, it's also separated us. And we become cocooned and fearless when we're behind a big glass box. But if you can see what's happening now, a lot of people are scared to talk to each other. There's more loneliness, as much as we think we have 5,000 friends. True. It's funny, I also think that the Trump administration could be the best thing that's ever happened, only because it's finally, so much shit is finally rubbled up that finally people have to speak up. And this president really didn't say or do anything, period. Not even good or bad. From Me Too, from women's rights, from everything, it seemed like everybody else spoke up because nothing else did it. Maybe it finally came to a bubble. My question to you is, does everybody have an opinion? Are we gonna have more FaceTime like this? Are we gonna have more people time? Or is there something more powerful than us, more powerful than the that's actually watching all this craziness and feeding more into it? Are they gonna distract it with silly reality shows while they figure something out so there's finally a total totalitarian something? Or are we just going through growing pains?
Oh, I don't know, that was a lot. I just wanted to kind of bring up, I don't know if it fits exactly, but you mentioned something bigger, controlling things. And there was some other stuff mentioned earlier. I just want to say, it is remarkably easy for one person to have a dramatic impact on the entire planet. And I think a lot of people don't realize this, because I've had these discussions where they assume that if you're not super wealthy, if you're not more powerful than the government, I think one of the reasons we've seen the government go after hackers so heavily in the past several years is because you will, look, there's this guy named Weave, and I don't know how true the story is, but apparently he called Pakistan pretending to be India. He spoofed the phone number of the ambassador and threatened nuclear war. It's just one guy with a spoofing app. Like, it doesn't need to be a power greater than the government to produce propaganda or dictators or try and create a totalitarian system. It could be a very small group of powerless people who have power now that we have the internet.
And I'd also like to point out that the online and offline aren't necessarily mutually exclusive places. I know a programmer who created a website where people can find if there's anybody in their community that they can meet up with and talk politics. So you can use online platforms in order to create the face-to-face presence that I do think is required to have these important conversations, because like you said, everyone's safe behind the computer. So I think, like, in terms of greater powers, it's hard to even say this without sounding trite, But I think the power of people working together towards a goal and working in solidarity with one another on a wide range of issues to better their community, to better their, existence, is that higher power, so to speak. And I think that combined with the online and offline worlds will be what takes us forward.
Since the beginning of time, whenever anybody's added something to our little palette, they've said, this is horrible. Well, as soon as there was the train, the Iron Horse, this is the worst. What do you mean it connected us? No, we're leaving and families are broken apart. You name it. I'm sure the person who said, look, I've got this thing called a knife. You can cut things with it, like it's skin. I'm sure he was stabbed immediately thereafter. So we've been talking about this since day one. There's always been this terrible thing about, but there's this, I'm not here by the way, but there's this interesting paradox which I find fascinating. We have the library in Alexandria in our pocket. How many times have you been someplace and you said, when did Newt Rockney die? You said, who the hell is Newt Rockney? Just a minute, and I've got this answer. And yet we know nothing. We write constantly and can't write. We can't write. We were the love letter, the what? Nobody's writing, but we're writing constantly. No, we're not. These are glyphs and whatever. So there's this wonderful paradox. There's this wonderful, and there's this weird thing about taking this separation. Because one of these days when you're going to be found guilty, when we go to RFID chips, I'm gonna be crazy for a moment. We have little chips in us, and kids are gonna stand in line and wait, and they go, look at this, here I am, I don't need a wallet, I've got this chip in my hand, I've got everything. No, we're easy pass, look at me, hey, look, Bob's coming, why? Because he's got the chip, this is great. And then one day, when they find you guilty of something, you're gonna go to a judge, and he's not gonna put you in jail, he's gonna just turn your chip off, and you're not going to exist. But we're gonna sit back in a club like this and say, how in the hell did this happen? This is the part of being cursed with having a brain, having an imagination, being able to marvel at technology, but also being scared, witless as to how this thing is, where we're going. It's what, would you ever want to go back? Let me just say something quickly. This got out of the government's hands. I don't know how they turned their back, DARPA wasn't paying attention, and we had it. And they've been trying to claw this thing back through CISPA, through DMCA, which I've had problems with that, copyright, intellectual property laws, you name it, bullying, libel, Yelp libel. Yo, I didn't like your tacos, you're gonna sue me. They're trying to claw this thing back, and they're doing everything in their power. But was there any of us here tonight who would ever want to give this back and go back 30 years ago? Is there anybody, despite everything that we've said? Anybody?
Sometimes I'm on a telephone, text my fucking wall, so I can find it and not follow it. I mean, I'll walk around with, people say I've been calling all day, I said, well, I forgot I turned my phone down when I was at the studio.
Aside from that.
There were more reasons I wanna go back. What we're not
want
addressing here is that we're all building these cocoons online. And they're being built for us when we use Google, and we're doing it in social media. People are not being conversant. They're swapping opinions.
Raise your hand. Who wants to go
How
back?
do you get
Who wants to go
dialogue
back? Time
going?
capsule back 50 years. Anybody where we're all conversing and we don't, anybody want, you?
I would go back. You should let me finish my
Oh,
sentence.
sure, I'm sorry.
No, it's gone.
Well, I don't think that they have to be mutually exclusive. Like the fact that you can go online and create meetup groups, you can go online and create protests, like Facebook events that happen in real life. Like they don't, or not Facebook events, because screw Facebook, but you get the idea. Like you can use the online platform in order to create real life instances. So is that what people use the internet for? No, but the point is that you don't have, it's not just like going back or going forward. You can use the internet to create those spaces that you had before the internet.
I don't have a choice, so I can't go back.
Why don't you have a choice?
But can I make it 50 years ago? That's not possible. But, and I don't have a choice but to use this, and I use it more often than I'd like to. But I find that sometimes I'm attached to it, And I find that I look at it, I wake up in the morning, it's the first thing I look at. I look at it right before I go to bed. The second I get out of work, it's in my hand. And I know that that's not just me. Most of my social interactions are with this. I don't think it's healthy.
That's why I said this is the new nicotine. People used to wake up and have a cigarette in the morning, there were commercials for that.
But you can just not.
I don't even think it's a new nicotine.
I
It
don't
comes in a
have
new
any
car.
friends.
No, I mean.
Yeah, but you said you wake up,
If
you
you
look
look
at
at
it.
it, I don't think it's.
You can put your phone in the other room and wake up and stare at the window.
It's in your car.
I could if I could.
I think it may be time for the next question.
It's the way life is now.
It's,
It's the way interactions are now.
it's hard, and there's like a whole new level of self-discipline that we're not good at.
But it's
So-
not just self-discipline, I mean, to go out, to meet people, to do things like that, it's really pretty impossible to do without it. I've tried both, it's really pretty impossible to do without it in this day and age.
But I definitely used to read a lot more long books, and I do miss that.
There's a few things that I would go back to. A little, not a lot, but quite a few, and I would like to see it would be nice if Generation Z had a bit of a taste of what we had 30 years ago in the best way. No, not racism, and not violence, and not stuff that was like, oh God, this has got to stop. But there were certain things that were great, like music.
Well, it is happening. There's a new like dumb phone.
And a telephone where, hey, wanna go out? No, there wasn't,
No, but that's coming,
or anything like that.
there's new products coming out that are actually going back to that. It's like new versions of old products, like where a phone where you can, it's a new version of phone where all you can do is text and call. Or, so there will be modern versions kind of clinging back to that
And it's
entire
not, you
thing.
don't have to reinvent the wheel. Again, we don't really have to, but maybe sometimes go back some ways to a little bit of songs of wood. I love technology, I love progress. He mentioned music. Yeah, you know what? Today, we could take our music collection with us, and it could be 10,000, whatever, we could take it across the street on vacation, and it'd still be safe at home at the same time. 30 years ago, no, you had to have a truck. Yeah.
Before we move on to the next question, Styx, do you have any comments?
Yes, I would say as someone who proudly has never owned a smartphone and who tries not to carry his cheap ass track phone anywhere if I can't be bothered to because I never use it and I don't really care. It's just for emergencies. I would say the internet in some cases can really be helpful for coordinating people's social interactions. For instance, I live in an area that's fairly rural. There aren't that many people physically around me. Now, what's the guarantee that any of those people has anything significantly enough in common with me at all for me to form, maybe a friendship stronger than, hey, how's the weather? Hey, how's it hanging by? There's no guarantee of that. You're in most of you, I assume, live in or around the New York metro region. Well, that's a very large place. There are, I think, 15, 20 million people within the metro area. Here, it's small town America. There's, I think, a bit of a cultural difference between the two. But I'm not glued to my phone. I think that increasingly we're seeing perhaps that people are coming unglued from such things, but they've got to be there. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. This is now the main form of human communication. It's no longer interpersonal.
There are pros and there's cons to it. It's created stronger connections between some people over longer distances. But at the same time, I think one of the problems we are seeing, if I could be a little negative, because I love mobile technology, I love the internet, but I just want to point out that it seems like we are moving in a direction where people are actually shocked if you talk to them in real life. A buddy of mine made a video where he's like in the New York subway, and he's like, you look around at the how many million people travel in the subway, never once look at each other, talk to each other, and here they are in the same city, probably working right next to each other, and never once say, how you doing?
Yeah.
Well, the fact that Styx doesn't have a cell phone is, that's evidence that it can be done. I mean, he's a major public figure on YouTube, embracing the technology, but also simultaneously having the discipline to control his own life. So
It's a
that's
Vermont
cool.
thing, don't worry.
It's
Envision a future where we would retreat from some technologies. I visited the Hopi Indians in Arizona, and one of the elders was talking about how their culture had been diminished by the roads, which allowed for cars to travel between the different bases. And I was like, okay, they forced these roads on you, the US government kind of forced them on you, what would you do? And he was like, oh, well, I'd smash them up. And I realized I'd never in my life thought about the idea that you could smash up a road and just go back. You know, and actually, if people began to realize that they had lost, significant kind of aspects of maybe, being able to have deeper connection, deeper communion, it might be that in some future point, we'll want to become almost like post-technological. And we'll think about, if I visited Amazonian tribes in the rainforest, and, their culture is so incredibly rich in so many levels compared to ours, including their connection to nature and visionary technologies like ayahuasca and so on. That, in a way, we can be seen as a much poorer culture, much more monoculture, much more trapped in very limited relationship to a very ecologically reduced environment. So anyway, it's something to think about.
I wanted to point out one thing too of why I would never go back. One thing, this information was really profound to me because I never really thought about it. I don't know if it matters to you, but lethal crime and death have gone down significantly because of cell phone technology. 50 years ago, if someone got stabbed or shot or fell down and hit their head, how long until paramedics could arrive on scene? Today, we all have cell phones, and it's very, very quick relative to how it used to be. So I think we can consider that as a really powerful net positive. We save a lot of lives.